Welcome to the world of exploration. Welcome to the world of learning. Let's start exploring. Let's start learning. Alright, so we are going to start off from Chaucer to Tottel's Miscellany. Now, after the death of Chaucer, the condition in England became very unfavorable, as we have already spoken before about the conditions, the social, the economic, the conditions that prevailed in England had actually worsened and had actually became unfavorable, right? So there were political conflicts and war that could be seen. Thus, the 15th century does not make much literary productiveness. Therefore, it did not have much of literary work or literary art that could be produced. Some poets who tried to imitate Chaucer's style, but still there were some poets, obviously, that we get to see that tried to imitate Chaucer's style, and therefore they produced some manuscripts. But because those were imitative, they did not hold much of permanent value. But because they were imitative in nature, they were copied in nature, therefore they did not have much value attached to it. They did not have lasting value attached to it. From these people, the most prominent were Thomas and John Lydgate, who wrote the Governal of Princes and Stories of Thebes. However, the poet William Dunbar's Dance of the Seven Deadly Sins is very original with humor, vigor and homely pathos. Now let me just highlight it so that it becomes clearer, to you people. William Dunbar's Dance of the Seven Deadly Sins. Yes. So let me just underline. From these people, the most prominent were Thomas Occleve and John Lydgate, who wrote the Governal of Princes and Stories of Thebes. However, the poet William Dunbar's Dance of the Seven Deadly Sins is very original with humor, vigor, and homely pathos. In prose, there was more work done. So in prose, there were writers who were writing prose, but otherwise, less of artistic work was done. It was more of imitative nature or a copied way. So, from these people, the most prominent were Thomas Occleve and John Lydgate, who wrote the Governal of Princes and Stories of Thebes. However, the poet William Dunbar's Dance of the Seven Deadly Sins is very original with humor, vigor, and homely pathos. In prose, there was more work done. Reginald Peacock's Block of Faith proved to be a landmark in English prose. One of the great things that happened during this period was the establishment of the first English printing press. Caxton did it at Westminster in 1476. So again, establishment of a printing press was something that had a landmark or that had a prominent place in England in 1476. Other important works that started at a later time of this period include English New Testament. So English New Testament had come. Old Testament already existed. New Testament had come. The complete English Bible of Miles Coverdale, Pastime of Pleasure, etc. Sir Thomas More's Utopia is typical, and through writing of this period, it was translated from Latin in 1551, and it described an ideal society. Obviously, utopia as a word, it suggests that we talk about an ideal society. At the end of this period stand out two names, Sir Thomas Wyatt and Henry Howard of Earl of Surrey. They have the honor of bringing love poetry and sonnet to English literature. They have the honor of bringing love poetry and sonnet to English literature. Who? Sir Thomas Wyatt and Henry Howard. Surrey was also the first writer to use 10-syllable verse, which also has the name of blank verse. So 10-syllable verse, which also has the name of blank verse. In 1557, Tottel's Miscellany a compilation of miscellaneous English poems came out. Almost half of the poems in his collection were of Wyatt and Surrey, of Thomas Wyatt and Surrey. Total's miscellany, published just a year before Elizabeth's period, marked the dawn of a new era, as it was. Here, then we move on to the next age, that is the age of Shakespeare. Now we are going to talk about the age of Shakespeare. Clear? It is already highlighted, so I don't need to highlight. So the age of Shakespeare, or the Renaissance, or in history of English literature. So the age of Shakespeare started with the start of Elizabeth's reign in 1558. So it started with the start of Elizabeth's reign in 1558. It ends with the death of James I, and this particular age ends with the death of James I. The age of Shakespeare started with the start of Elizabeth's reign in 1558. It ends with the death of James I in 1625. This period is the golden age in history. This period is the golden age in history of English literature. Clear? So this period, the age of Shakespeare, or the Renaissance in history of English literature, is the golden age. We call it the age of Shakespeare. We also refer to it as the Renaissance in history of English literature, and this period is also known as the golden age in history of English literature because of the productiveness of it. This period brought massive changes in the history of English literature. The age of Shakespeare is divided into two periods. Now the age of Shakespeare is divided into two periods. Clear? The age of Elizabeth and the Jacobean age. The age of Elizabeth is what we are going to have a look at right now. Clear? So the age of Elizabeth. With the reign of Elizabeth, the English literature started to flourish. The first publication which marked the start of the golden age was Shepherd's Calendar. Again, very important, underline it, was Shepherd's Calendar by Edmund Spenser in 1579. In the first half of the Elizabethan era, there was composition of little verses of any value. Spenser was the most celebrated poet of this era, and he was called the poet's poet. Please make sure that you are understanding all the points. Very important. Spenser was the most celebrated poet of this era, of the Elizabethan era, of the age of Elizabeth, and he was called the poet's poet. He had a remarkable influence on the poetry that followed after him. Elizabethan literature was also the golden age of drama. As we have talked about this earlier as well, that it is the golden age of drama, right? So in Elizabethan literature was also the golden age of drama too, as Shakespeare was present there. Why it was known as a golden age of drama? Because Shakespeare was also present in this age. Shakespeare plays were in a range of different genres. Clear? So different genres were there. It was not only in a particular genre that he was writing in. There were myriad genres. Those included Shakespearean tragedies like Hamlet, Othello, comedies like, so tragedies, under tragedies we have Hamlet, we have Othello, right? These were tragedies. Now under comedies we have As You Like It, historic plays like Richard III. Now when we talk about historic plays, again this is a different genre. So comedies, underline comedies, it's very important. Tragedies. Under tragedies, we had Hamlet and Othello. So tragedies, comedies and historic plays. Like Richard III. Other writers of Elizabethan literature include Sir Philip. So other writers of Elizabethan literature include Sir Philip Sidney, Thomas Campion, Sackville Norton, Thomas Kidd, and others. Famous literary works of this era include The Fairy Queen, which again had a pivotal place, Astrophel and Stella, The Defense of Poetry, Gorboduc, and The Spanish Tragedy. Clear? The Jacobean Age. Next is the Jacobean Age. Now we talk about the Jacobean Age. The Jacobean Age was the era of James I. This was the era of James I. The literature written during this period is Jacobean literature. Shakespeare wrote some of the prominent plays during this period. Those plays include King Lear, 1605, Macbeth, 1606, and The Tempest, 1610. These were the plays that were written in Jacobean Age, such as King Lear, Macbeth, The Tempest. Jacobean literature as compared to Elizabethan literature was dark. So it was dark in nature as compared to Elizabethan literature. It is because Shakespeare wrote his so-called problem plays like All Is Well That Ends Well and famous tragedies in this era. Clear? So Shakespeare wrote his so-called problem plays like All Is Well That Ends Well and famous tragedies in this era. John Webster, who was a dramatist, also portrayed the problem of evil in his dramas. This period's comedy consisted of a bitter satire. So when we are talking about comedy under this period's comedy consisted of a bitter satire from Ben Jonson and the diverse writings from John Fletcher and Francis Beaumont. Popular works of this time include Volpone, Bartholomew Fair, The Night of Burning Pestle, The White Devil, The Changeling, etc. King James Bible was the most prominent work of the Jacobean literature. Clear? Then we move on to the age of Milton or Puritan age. In the next session, we will discuss about the age of Milton, which is also referred to as the Puritan age.